In this video, we'll be exploring grid variables in Matillion ETL, how they work, and how to set them up in a job. A variable is an object that can hold a single data value of a specific type. Variables can be used in all sorts of parameters and expressions to allow the user to pass and centralize environment-specific configuration. Grid variables are a special type of job variable that can be declared in Matillion ETL. Grid variables are 2D arrays that hold scalar values in named columns. Grid variables can be used in many components where lists of data need to be passed around. The following Matillion ETL components can be used when working with grid variables. For example, a grid variable can be used to populate table metadata or to pass arrays of data for use in Python scripts. In this video, we'll go through how to create grid variables, then use the query result to grid component to query a table and load the resulting data into a grid variable. Then we'll use that variable as the metadata to create a table. Then we'll create a second grid variable and go through how to use a Python script component first to call the grid variable, then manually update it. This grid variable will contain currency exchange rate data to insert into the table we made previously. Finally, we'll populate the second grid variable using the Python script component with live exchange rate data from a public API. To create a grid variable, right-click on a job and click Variables, then Manage Grid Variables. Or you can right-click on the job canvas. This will open a dialog listing all the grid variables for your job. To create a new grid variable, click the plus button, and this will open the Create Grid Variable wizard. Then the following fields need to be completed. Name, give the variable a name to identify in other dialogs and lists. Behavior, determines the variable's branch behavior inside the job. The behavior of a grid variable can be shared or copied. Copied variables can be updated within one branch of a job without updating variables of the same name in other branches. A branch using a copied variable will begin by taking its default value, even if the variable has been updated in another parallel branch. Shared variables are updated in a job-wide fashion. As such, regardless of branches, if a shared variable is updated in one branch, all other branches will use that updated value. Visibility, select public or private. If private, this variable cannot be discovered or overwritten when the job is called from a run orchestration or run transformation component. And finally, a description of the grid variable. This description has no functionality beyond reminding you what the variable is for. So for our example, we'll call our new grid variable table metadata, with the behavior of copied and visibility of public. Then we need to add the columns that we need to the grid variable. For this example, we will need the columns, data type, size, and precision. We'll also need to define the column types. The options here are text, numeric, and datetime to match our table metadata. The table metadata we're going to use in this example is held in a table I created earlier, which you can see here. Then we'll need to add some default values. Now we can see our completed grid variable. Click OK. Then drag the query result to grid component onto the canvas. Open the Properties tab and here we'll need to define some properties. First, the target table. We will select the table metadata, which I created before, which has all our table metadata info in it. Then we need to select our target table columns. We will select all for this example. And then we need to select the grid variable table metadata, which we've just set up. Then we need to map our grid variable. Mapping the values we've just set up to the table metadata we have in a table. So for the last step, we'll now need to create the table. Drag a create table component onto the canvas and choose a new name for the table. For this example, we will call it exchange rate. Then, under the columns property, select the Use Grid Variable option rather than adding the columns manually. Here you will have the option to select our grid variable table metadata and map the columns, data type, size and precision which are required to make our table. There are other options here, but they are not required for this example. Once the properties are completed and the job is validated successfully, right-click on the canvas and click Run Job, and this will create our new table, Exchange Rate, which for now will be empty. Now we have our table. Next, we're going to access and update a grid variable using a Python script. Matillion ETL allows users to write Python scripts in the form of a component in an orchestration job. Drag a Python script component onto the canvas from the Components menu. Then, in the Properties tab, open up the script property. You'll see the Python script component comes preloaded with helper text. Lines 6 and 7 detail a command that allows the user to print the values of a reference grid variable. First, we'll make a second grid variable which will hold the exchange rate data. We will call this exchange rate, with the behaviour of shared and the visibility of public. We'll add two columns. The first called country code, and the second exchange rate. Click Next, and now we'll fill in some default values. And we'll add in a couple of example rows. Once we're done, click OK. Then navigate back to the Python script component. Then let's print the values of our newly created grid variable exchange rate. Type the following command in the command string and replace the example grid variable with exchange rate. Then click Run. We can see the current values of the exchange rate grid variable in the output section of the Python script component. Now we'll update the values found in exchange rate to update the two entries GBP and CAD listed with new values. To update a grid variable from within the Python script component, we can use the context update grid variable command, which can be copied from line 9 of the help text. Type the following context update command with values that are different from those we originally set for the grid variable. We'll also add the print getGridVariable command so we can see the updated values. Then click Run, and we can see the updated grid variable contents. Now for the last part of this example, we'll use the Python script to make an API call to populate the grid variable exchange rate using a public API of currency exchange rate data. The following code calls a public API of exchange rate data and separates out the data we need into a dictionary of name-value pairs. And you can use the context getGridVariable and context updateGridVariable commands to interact with our grid variables. Changes will remain until the job ends its run. This is just an example of how this can be done. Many other methods can be used. Before we run this, we'll first increase the size of the grid variable so we can get more values from the API call. I've also updated the exchange rate value to 0 so we can clearly see the data being pulled from the API. First, we'll print the current values of the grid variable exchange rate, then print the values from the exchange rate public API, then finally push these values into our grid variable. Click Run to execute the script, and we can see the 3 stages in the results. This is one of the many ways you can use grid variables in Matillion ETL. For full documentation on grid variables, please visit the Matillion documentation site. For more videos, please subscribe to the channel. And to get started with Matillion, visit matillion.com.